Welcome to Stories Cafe. I'm your host for today's mystery. We're joining Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings today in the exotic, war-torn streets of Casablanca, Morocco, 1842, with the Casablanca Confession. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Settle in with a warm cup of mint tea, perhaps with some Moroccan pastries, and let's uncover this mystery together. The Casablanca Confession, Chapter 1. The Anxious Spy, the Cafe. More squatted like a jewel box in the heart of Casablanca's Medina quarter. Its brass-studded door perpetually exhaling clouds of aromatic smoke that mingled hashish, Turkish tobacco, and the desert winds, carrying whispers of jasmine. It was here, on the evening of March 15, 1904, that Hercule Poirot and I found ourselves reluctantly installed at a corner table, nursing glasses of mint tea that had long since grown cold. Our presence in this exotic outpost was entirely unplanned, a consequence of engine troubles that had grounded our aircraft bound for London. What should have been a brief refueling stop had stretched into 3 days of enforced leisure in Morocco's most cosmopolitan city. Poirot, typically, had made the best of our situation by conducting what he termed anthropological observations of Theocaf's diverse clientele. Observe mon ami. He murmured, his zig-shaped head tilting slightly as he surveyed the smoky interior. Here we have you, most fascinating cross-section of humanity. The refugee from Vienna at table 6. Note how he shields his newspaper when the gentleman in the fez approaches. And there, by the window, the lady with the emerald bracelet, who has not once looked at her companion, yet hangs upon every word of the conversation at the neighboring table. I followed his gaze across the dimly lit space where oil lamps cast dancing shadows. On the traditional tile work, the cafe was indeed a babel of languages and nationalities: French colonials in crisp white linens, German refugees clutching worn passports, mysterious Arabs conducting business in hushed tones, and the occasional British or American who had wandered too far from the European quarter. Fascinating as always, Poirot, I replied, though I confess my attention was more drawn to the exotic surroundings than to his usual exercise in human observation. But I do hope our aircraft will be repaired soon. This enforced idleness. Pugh's eyebrows rose in mild reproach. But Mynheer Hastings, when is the study of human nature ever idle in a place such as this, where so many cultures converge, where so many secrets seek refuge from? The storm of war. He was interrupted by a shadow falling across our table. I looked up to see a man of perhaps 45 years' talent, angular, with a sort of weathered complexion that spoke of years spent under foreign suns. His pale blue eyes darted nervously about the cafe before settling on Poirot with unmistakable laconicity. Miss Poua. The man's voice carried the cultured accent of an educated Englishman, though it trembled slightly. I do hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I am Edwin Carmichael. He paused, as if the name should carry significance. I wonder if I might have a word. Poirot gestured graciously to an empty chair. But of course, Mr. Carmichael, please, you will join us. This is my friend, Captain Hastings. Carmichael shook my hand with fingers that were distinctly damp despite the evening's coolness as he settled into his chair. I noticed how High-Sides continued their restless survey of the cafe's other occupants, a man clearly ill at ease, though whether from the heat, the exotic surroundings, or some more pressing concern I could not immediately let her on. I heard you were in Casablanca, Carmichael began, then caught himself. That is to say, word gets around quickly in the European community here when they learn that the famous Hercule Poirot was temporarily stranded, trailed off, wrapping his hands around his untouched tea glass. You are perhaps in some difficulty, Monsieur Poirot inquired gently, or maybe ya have a problem of the criminal nature that requires the services of Hercule Poirot. Carmichael's laugh was sharp and humorless. Criminal. Yes, I suppose you could call it that, though the law might take a different view of the matter. He glanced around the cafe once more, then leaned forward. Conspiratorially, I work for His Majesty's government, sir. Why? Or rather, I did these days. My position is somewhat more ambiguous. I saw Poirot's interest quicken thou. His expression remained pleasantly neutral. Ah, you are perhaps connected with thy intelligence services. Was American, the distinctions become a blurred in wartime. Carmichael's fingers drummed against the table's brass surface. You've been acting as liaison with the Free French forces here in Morocco. Delicate work, you understand, many competing interests, many old grievances. The poor fellow was clearly in a state of considerable agitation. His eyes kept returning to a particular table near the entrance, where a striking dark-haired woman sat alone, occasionally glancing in no direction. At another table, a uniformed French officer read a newspaper with a sort of intensive concentration that suggested his attention lay elsewhere. Tiley Masuka. Poirot said softly, "It appears to Poirot that you are a man with something weighing heavily upon the conscience." Esper. Carmichael's composure cracked visibly. Conscience. Yes, that's precisely. Problem, you see. There was an operation back in 1940. Things went wrong, terribly wrong. Good men died because of. He stopped abruptly, his face pale in the lamplight, because of Pua prompted gently, because the Somion betrayed them. The words came out in a rush. And now Nazamion knows that I know the truth. I've been receiving messages, threats, subtle ones, you understand, but unmistakable in their intent from his jacket pocket. Carmichael withdrew a sealed envelope. Load with age and handling. He clutched it protectively against his chest. I've written it all down, everything that happened, every detail. I can remember. It's all here, the whole sordid truth. Poirot's gray eyes fixed intently on the envelope. And you fear for your safe? You fear for my life? Carmichael corrected bluntly. But more than that, I fear the truth will die with me, that the real traitor will never be brought to justice. He stood abruptly, the envelope still pressed against his jacket. Monsieur Poirot, I need your help, but not here. Too many eyes, too many ears. He fumbled in his wallet and placed several francs on the table. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. The Hotel Excelsior in the European Quarter. I'm staying in room 237. Well, Yoakum, but certainly Pooh, replied Poirot. He is always at the service of justice. Carmichael's relief was palpable, though his nervousness remained. Thank you. I knew you would understand, a man of your reputation, your integrity. He shook back our hands with the fervor of a drowning man, grasping a lifeline until tomorrow. Then he turned to leave, then paused. Be careful whom you trust, here, Miss Poirot. In Casablanca, nothing is quite what it seems, and old sins cast long shadows. With that cryptic warning, Edwin Carmichael melted into the evening crowd outside the cafe, leaving behind only the lingering scent of fear and the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. As I watched his retreating figure through the doorway, I could not shake that feeling that we had just encountered a man already marked by death, chapter to murder in the Medina Quarter. The morning of March 16th dawned with that peculiar clarity that seems uniquito, North Africa, where the sun strikes the white buildings with an almost surgical precision. Row and I made our way through the bustling streets of Casablanca's European Quarter, past vendors hawking their wares and the inevitable clusters of refugees gathered around the consular offices, all hoping for a passage to safer shores. The Hotel Excelsior stood on a corner overlooking the harbor. Its French colonial facade, a testament to more prosperous times. Even in wartime, it maintained an air of faded elegance, though. I noticed that many oft ground floor windows were now protected by sandbags, a practical concession to the uncertain. Time's Tracy observed, consulting his pocket watch as we approached the entrance punctuality. She is a virtue much appreciated by Hercule Poirot. Lobby was cool and dimly lit, decorated with an eclectic mixture of European furniture and local Moroccan artifacts. A handful of guests sat reading newspapers in various languages. Ceiling fans stirred the air with languid persistence, the desk clerk nervous looking. A Frenchman with a pencil mustache directed us to the lift with barely concealed anxiety room. 237 Messier, he said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief despite feminine coolness. But perhaps you should speak first with the manager. That will not be necessary, Poirot repeatedly, Miss Carmichael. He is expecting us. The lift, a contraption that had clearly seen better days, carried us to the second floor with much grinding and protesting. As we emerged into the corridor, I was struck by an unusual silence that seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence. Our footsteps echoed on the tiled floors. We made our way toward room 237. Poirot knocked gently on the door. MC Carmichael. It is Hercule Poirot. Silence. He knocked again more firmly, this time, sir. Carmichael, when no response came, Poirot tried to handle. The door swung open, easily revealing a scene that sent a chill down my spine despite the morning warmth. Edwin Carmichael lay sprawled across the bed, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Even from feet away, the dark stain spreading across his white shirt told its own grim story. His pale blue eyes, which had darted so nervously about the cafe the previous evening, now stared sightlessly at the ceiling. Mondore. Poirot breathed, his hand instinctively reaching out to prevent me from entering the room. We must disturb nothing, Hastings. This is a matter for the police. But even as he spoke, his sharp eyes were already cataloging the scene. Before us, the room had clearly been searched. Drawers, pulled open, papers scattered across the floor, the contents of Carmichael's suitcase strewn about with evident haste. Near the window, a chair lay overturned, and I could see that the wooden shutters hung at an odd angle. Envelope, I said suddenly. Poirot, that confession he mentioned, exact-toned. Observe, mon ami, how thoroughly someone has looked for it. Within my nest room was swarming with officials. Inspector Dubois of the French colonial police proved to be a compact, energetic man with intelligent dark eyes and a sort of methodical approach that immediately earned Poirot's profile. Unlike some provincial policemen I had encountered, Dubois seemed genuinely interested in hearing Poirot's observations. At first glance, one might suspect suicide, Dubois mused, examining the revolver that lay near Carmichael's right hand. A man tormented by waterman pressures, perhaps guilt over intelligence work. It would not be unprecedented. Poirot shook his head decisively. No, inspector. Consider the angle of the wound, the position of the weapon, the searching of the room. This was not suicide, but murder, most deliberate. As morning progressed, Inspector Dubois assembled witnesses in the hotel's small sitting room. The picture that emerged was both frustrating and intriguing. According to the night clerk, Carmichael had returned to the hotel around 11 o'clock the previous evening, appearing agitated but speaking to no one. The room adjacent to his had been empty, and the guests on either side reported hearing nothing unusual during the night. However, 3 individuals had been seen in the hotel's vicinity during the crucial hours, each with apparent reason to seek out Edwin Carmichael. The first was Mademoiselle Ide Moreau, the striking, dark-haired woman I had noticed watching a table at the Café Mo. She proved to be a nightclub singer at the fashionable cave. Delay possessed of that particular combination of beauty and worldliness that seems to flourish in such exotic ports. When questioned, she admitted to having an argument with Carmichael the previous evening. He came to my dressing room after my last performance, she explained in accented English, her dark eyes flashing with remembered anger. He wanted to discuss matters from the past, things that are better left buried. Told him to leave me alone, that I wanted nothing to do with him or his guilty conscience. When pressed about the nature of their conversation, her expression, Artemisia Carmichael, was involved in certain operations during the early days of Thor. Operations that cost French lives. I have reasons to remember him, but not fondly. The second suspect was Captain Bernardler, the French intelligence officer, whose newspaper reading at the cafe had seemed so deliberately focused a man of military bearing. With prematurely gray hair and tired eyes, he claimed to have met Carmichael on official business. We were coordinating intelligence activities, he stated with professional brevity. Carmichael had information about German infiltration attempts. Such meetings must necessarily be conducted with discretion. Yet, when Dubois pressed for details, Solelsi's answers became increasingly vague, and I noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he lit his cigarette. The third individual was perhaps the most intriguing. Baron Klaus von Zorf, an exiled German nobleman who had been living in Casablanca under what could charitably be called mysterious circumstances. Tall and aristocratic, with a sort of bearing that spoke of Prussian military training, he made no attempt to deny his presence at the hotel. Herr Carmichael had contacted me regarding certain historical matters, he said, in precise, accented English questions about events that occurred before America entered the war, when loyalties were less clearly defined. I came to see if we might reach an understanding. When asked to elaborate, the Baron's pale eyes grew cold. Some secrets, Inspector, are better left undisturbed. The war has created an intrigue without revisiting old wounds as the afternoon wore on. Poirot conducted his own examination of Carmichael's room with his characteristic thoroughness. He spent considerable time studying the overturned chair, the angle of the shutters, and particularly the area around the small writing desk where papers had been scattered. I watched him collect several seemingly insignificant items: a torn scrap of paper, a few grains of sand from windowsill, and what appeared to be a fragment of dark thread caught on the window latch, the confession letter. I ventured as we prepared to leave the hotel, "It's definitely gone." Spiro nodded grimly. "Vanished completely, mon ami, and with it perhaps the key to understanding not only why Edwin Carmichael died, but how long our three interesting suspects possessed. Both the opportunity and the desperate need to silence came. Forever the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hotel's courtyard as Weffenly departed, leaving Inspector Dubois to continue his methodical investigation. But I could see from Poirot's expression that the little gray cells were already working, furiously sorting through the tangled web of motives and alibis that surrounded this exotic crime. The game, as he might have said, in less tragic circumstance, was decidedly a foot chapter. Three secrets in the souk. The afternoon heat pressed down upon Casablanca like a physical weight as Puend. I ventured into the labyrinthine passages of the old Medina where destination was the souk, that sprawling marketplace where, according to Inspector Dubois, Edwin Carmichael had been conducting some of his more delicate business arrangements in recent weeks. In such a place as this, Poirot observed, stepping delicately around a pile of aromatic spices that had spilled from a merchant store. The barriers between truth and rumor, between commerce and conspiracy, they become most pleasantly burdenous. I found myself rather less enchanted by our surroundings. The narrow alleyways teemed with humanity, veiled women carrying baskets, children darting between the stalls, merchants calling out their wares in Arabic and French. The air was thick with a sense of leathering scents and something I preferred not to identify too closely. Our first stop, waste establishment of one Ahmed Ben Hassan, a dealer in carpets and antiquities, who, according to Inspector Dubois, had served as an informal meeting place for various members of Casablanca's international community. The old Moroccan proved to be a man of considerable dignity and surprising knowledge of European affairs. Our wealthy English gentleman said when Poirot mentioned Carmichael's name, a troubled man, that one. He would come here often these past weeks, always looking over the shoulder, always asking if someone had been making inquiries about him. Ben Hassan led us to a small alcove behind his main shop where low cushions surrounded a brass tea service. As we settled ourselves awkwardly on the unfamiliar seating, he continued his narrative. 3 days ago, he came here most agitated. He spoke of old sins coming back to how doyous haunt him. He said that someone from his past had arrived in Casablanca Sommion, who knew about certain events during the early war. Poirot leaned forward with interest. Did he mention what these events might have been? The merchant's weathered face grew grave. He spoke of an operation in 1940-something involving the French resistance near Lyon. Many good men, deed said, because of treachery, because someone who should have been trusted proved to be. He paused, searching for the proper words. A serpent in the garden. This revelation cast an entirely new light on our three suspects as we made our way through the bustling marketplace. Poirot's observations took on a more focused quality. Consider Hastings, he murmured, as we paused before a stall selling brass ornaments. What we now know of Mademoiselle Moreau's family circumstances: a French nightclub singer performing in Casablanca, while her countrymen fight for liberation. Why is she not in France? What circumstances brought her to Morocco? Was beginning to see the direction of his thoughts. You'd think she might have had personal reasons for hating Carmichael beyond mere political disagreements. It is a possibility most interesting. And what of Captain Lair, a professional intelligence officer who claims to be coordinating with British operations, yet who becomes evasive when pressed for details about his meetings with our victim? We found our next dancers at the Café de la Loire, where Ike Morrow performed her night of repertoire. For an audience of homesick Europeans and wealthy locals, the establishment was closed during the afternoon hours, but the proprietor, a portly Frenchman named Dubois, no relation to the inspector, proved willing to discuss his star performer, Medousel. He shrugged expressively. A woman of great talent, but also great sorrow. She arrived here 18 months ago from Lyon alone and with little money. Her family. He lowered his voice confidentially. They were active in the resistance. You understand? All dead now, except for her. The picture was becoming clearer, far more troubling when pressed for details. Dubois revealed that Ivy's brother, Marcel Moreau, had been among a group of resistance fighters captured by the Germans in the autumn of 1940. The operation had been betrayed, and Dale involved had been executed. She never speaks of it, Dubois added, but Samit. Late at night, after her performance, I have seen her weeping over letters she keeps hidden in her dressing room, letters from her brother. I believe written before his death. Our investigation of Captain proved equally illuminating, though in a more indirect fashion, through careful inquiries at various establishments frequented by French military personnel. We learned that had indeed been involved in resistance coordination activities during 1940. More significantly, he had been the French intelligence contact for the very operation that had resulted in Marcel Moreau's death. Captain barely escaped with his life confided. A retired French colonel we encountered at a small bistro near the harbor. He managed to cross into Switzerland just hours before the Germans rounded up his entire network. Some say he was lucky. Others whispered up, perhaps his escape was too convenient, too well-timed. The implications were disturbing. Had less served because of luck, skill, or something more sinister. Our final inquiries concerned Baron von Seckendorfen. Here, we encountered our most intriguing puzzle through the German exile community, a small but closely knit group of refugees and dissident we learned that the Baron had indeed been in contact with British intelligence during the early war years. He claimed to be providing information about German military preparations, explained a thin scholarly man who identified himself only as Professor Mayer. Whether this was from patriotic motives or mere opportunism, who can say, but certainly Hepus's knowledge that proved valuable to the Allied cause. According to Professor Muller, von Seckendorf had specifically warned British intelligence about German penetration of resistance networks in France during the autumn of 1940. The warning had come too late to save the Lion operation, but had apparently pre-feed similar disasters elsewhere. The Baron maintains that his warning was ignored or reached the wrong hands. Muller continued, he claims that British intelligence was itself compromised, that someone in London was passing information to the Germans. As evening approached, and we made our way back toward the European quarter, Poirot's expression had grown increasingly thoughtful. I could see that the little gray cells were working furiously, processing the complex web of relationships and motivations. We had uncovered 3 suspects. I summarized as we paused at a cafe for refreshment, each with compelling motives for wanting Carmichael. Dead-eyed, seeking revenge for her brother's death lair, possibly eliminating someone who suspected his treachery, and Von Eyre of silencing a man why might expose his own duplicitous role. Prime Zemo Hastings. Yet observe how each story, while compelling, contains certain inconsistencies that trouble the mind of Hercule Poirot. He refused to elaborate further, but I noticed how his fingers drummed against cable, a sure sign that some detail was bothering him as we watched the sunset over the Atlantic, painting the white buildings of Casablanca in shades of gold and crimson. I could not shake the feeling that we had only begun to penetrate the layers of deception surrounding Edwin Carmichael's death. The confession letter remained missing, and with it perhaps the key to understanding which of our suspects had the most pressing need to ensure that certain secrets died with its authoring. The gathering dusk, with the evening call to prayer echoing from the nearby mosque, the truth seemed as elusive as desert winds that stirred the dust in the marketplace, where so many secrets had been bought and sold. Chapter for the web unravels the morning of March 17th, brought disturbing news that transformed our investigation from a matter of solving past crimes to preventing future ones. Inspector Dubois arrived at our hotel before breakfast, his usually composed demeanor betraying signs of considerably agitated. Has been another attempt, he announced without preamble as we gathered in the small sitting room adjoining Poirot's chamber. Mademoiselle Morrow was attacked last night as she returned to her lodgings after her performance. I felt my heart quicken at this development. Good Lord, is she badly hurt? Fortunately, no knife thrust that missed its mark by mere cm. She managed to scream and attract attention. Her attacker fled into the Medina quarter before anyone could give proper pursuit. Dubois accepted the cup of coffee offered him with hands that trembled slightly. She insists it was too dark to see Harrison clearly, but she is convinced the attack was connected to Carmichael's murder. Poirot's eyes had taken on that peculiar intensity I knew so well. She had said nothing else, no detail, however small, about her attackering Lee. That he seemed to know the layout of the quarter very well. He disappeared as if he had planned his escape route in advance. And there was something. Dubois paused, consulting his notebook. She mentioned a scent, something like bergamot, she said, or perhaps expensive cologne, not the sort of thing one associates with common criminals. This detail seemed to particularly interest Poirot, though he made no immediate comment. Instead, he inquired about the whereabouts of our remaining suspects during the crucial hours. Captain claims to have been at a military briefing that lasted until nearly midnight. Dubois replied, I have verified this with his commanding officer. As for Baron von Seckendorf's inspector's expression grew troubled. This is where matters become more complicated. The Baron appears to have departed his hotel sometime during the night. His room shows signs of hasty packing, and the night clerk remembers seeing a taxi collect someone matching his description around 2 o'clock this morning. Filled, I exclaimed, but surely that suggests many things. Poirot interrupted gently, but we must be careful not to assume too much from circumstantial evidence. A man may flee for reasons other than guilt, particularly in times such as these. Despite this cautionary note, I found myself increasingly convinced that we were dealing with a case of systematic elimination. Someone was methodically removing witnesses to the 1940 betrayal, and Edinburgh had narrowly escaped becoming the second victim. Our morning was spent in a thorough examination of Mademoiselle Amaro's lodgings in the scene of the attack, her modest apartment above a tailor shop in the French Quarter had been ransacked, though she insisted nothing had been taken like Carmichael's hotel room. It bore the hallmarks of someone searching desperately for specific documents. What were they looking for? Asked, as we examined the overturned furniture and scattered papers. Perhaps letters from her brother, Poirot suggested, or other evidence connecting her to the 1940 operation. Someone wishes to ensure that all trace of that unfortunate affair disappear permanently. It was during our examination of the alleyway where the attack had occurred that Poirot made his first significant discovery, caught on a protruding nail near the spot where I'd claimed her attacker had vanished. He found a small fragment of cloth, expensive wool of a distinctive charcoal gray, observed the weave Hastings. Hassad, holding the fragment up to catch the light. This is not from ready-made clothing, but bespoke tailoring of the highest quality. How many men in Casablanca, too, you suppose, can afford such luxury? Our afternoon brought a sad discovery when Inspector Dubois presented us with items covered from Carmichael's effects. Among his personal papers, the police had found a torn photograph that had initially been dismissed as unimportant when Hero examined it with his magnifying glass. However, his interest was immediately aroused. Tartly, the photograph read to show a group of men in civilian clothing standing before what looked like a French railway station. Most, the image had been torn away, leaving only 3 figures clearly visible. One was unmistakably a younger Redwing, Carmichael. The second figure had been deliberately scratched out with ink obscuring the face entirely. The third man, standing somewhat apart from the others, bore a striking resemblance to Captain Lair, though the uniform was different, and the photograph appeared told several years old. Most interesting. Poole murmured, turning the photograph over to examine the back. In faded pencil, someone had written, Lyon Station, October 1940. Before the disaster, the final piece of evidence emerged when Inspector Dubois received a curious telegram that had been delayed in transmission from London, addressed to Carmichael at the Hotel Excelsior. It had arrived several hours after his death. The message was brief but cryptic. Package delivered, recipient confirmed identity, expect developments soonest. WCWC. I amused. Winston Churchill, perhaps, though it seems unlikely the Prime Minister would be sending coded messages to individual intelligence operatives. Holst studied the telegram with unusual intensity. Perhaps not the Prime Minister, mon ami, but someone whose initials happen to coincide, and note the reference to recipient confirmed identity, most suggestive when considered alongside our other evidence. As evening approached, I found my suspicions increasingly focused on Itmaro. Despite the attack upon her person, the very audacity of staging such an assault as misdirection appealed to ascertain type of criminal mind, and her access to Carmichael through their previous confrontation provided both opportunity and motive. Consider the facts, Poirot argued as we took our evening meal at a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. she had the strongest personal motive of revenge for her brother's death. She knew Carmichael's habits and whereabouts, and what else would have had access to his hotel room. Without arousing suspicion, a beautiful woman appearing distressed at his door. Poirot listened to my reasoning with that peculiar expression of political tension he reserved for my more enthusiastic theories. Your logic, it has merit, Moshe Hastings. Yet, there are certain small details that don't, not as you English say, fit properly together, such as the scent of bergamot that Mademoiselle Moreau mentioned for one, and the expensive cloth fragment. If you discovered these, suggest a level of sophistication, of careful preparation that does not accord with a crime of passion driven by personal revenge. He paused to sip his wine thoughtfully. No. I believe our murderer is someone whose motives are more complex, whose methods more calculated to me own, who understood precisely what information Carmichael possessed and why it represented such a deadly threat. As we prepared to retire for the evening, Poirot made an announcement that both surprised and concerned me. Tomorrow evening, Hastings, we shall return to the Café Mo, where this affair began. I have asked Inspector Dubois to arrange for our remaining suspects to join us there. You mean to reveal the solution? Indeed, the little gray cells have at last penetrated the fog of deception surrounding this case. Tomorrow evening, the truth shall be illuminated, and justice long delayed shall finally be served. As I laid my bed that night, listening to the sounds of the exoticity beyond our hotel windows, I could not shake a feeling of any somewhere in the labyrinthine streets of Casablanca, a murderer walked free, securing the belief that their crime had been perfectly concealed. Tomorrow would prove whether Poirot's confidence was justified, or whether we were about to walk into a trap as deadly as the one that had claimed Edwin Carmichael's life. Chapter 5. The Grey Cells. Illuminata. Evening air in the Café Mo hung heavy with anticipation, as well as the usual mixture of tobacco, smoke, and incense. Poirot had chosen the same Kernatobel where we had first encountered Edwin Carmichael, and as I surveyed the assembled company, I could not help but reflect on how dramatically our circumstances had changed in just 3 days. Inspector Dubois sat with professional alertness, his notebook ready to record whatever revelations might emerge by C.D. Ham. Ike Mororo appeared pale, but composed though. I noticed how her eyes darted nervously between the other occupants of our secluded alcove. Captain had arrived precisely on time, his military bearing intact despite the obvious strain of recent events. The empty chair that should have held Baron von Seckendorf served as a stark reminder of his mysterious disappearance. Madame et Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice carrying clearly despite the cafe's ambient noise. We are gathered here because 3 days ago a man came to this very table seeking help. When Carmichael feared for his life, and tragically his fears proved justified. Tonight we shall discover why he didn't, more importantly, who killed him. He paused to survey his audience, his gray eyes noting every expression, every subtle reaction. The surface facts of the case appear straightforward. A former intelligence operative, tormented by guilt over a wartime operation, is murdered in his hotel room. His confession letter disappears, and we have 3 suspects each with compelling motives for silencing him forever. Captain Lair shifted slightly in his chair. With respect, Monsieur Poirot, while I appreciate your reputation, surely the obvious solution. Ah, no, Poirot interrupted gently. The obvious solution, she is rarely the correct one in cases of this complexity. Consider first Mademoiselle Belle Moreau, whose brother died in the Layen operation of 1940. Her motive appears overwhelmed grief for a betrayal that cost her family their lives. Havette's hands trembled as she reached out for a glass of mint tea. I have told you I argued with Carmichael, yes, but I did not kill him. Indeed, you did not. Agreed, for while your anger was genuine, Your grief, authentic, certain details, eliminate. You was our murderer. The attack upon your person, for instance, while it appeared to be an attempt to silence you, careful examination reveals it to be something quite different. The knife wound, though dramatic, was superficially placed to cause alarm. Rather than death, the expensive cologne, noticed by yourself, ought hardly be your own scent, since you would not have remarked upon it so specifically. Most tellingly, the cloth fragment found at the scene came from a man's garment of the finest quality. Far beyond your current means, Inspector Dubois leaned forward with interest. You suggest the attack was staged. Not staged, Inspector, but misdirected. Their real target was not Mademoiselle Marl's life, but her credibility as a witness. Someone wished to establish her as a victim, rather than a suspect, while simultaneously searching her lodgings for evidence that might incriminate the true killer. I found myself nodding, as Burroughs' logic became clear in Baron von Seckendorf's flight certainly suggests guilt. O Condor, Hastings, the Baron's disappearance, while suspicious, actually provides him with an excellent alibi for the attack on Mademoiselle. Moral, a man cannot be in two places simultaneously, and I have established that he was already departing Casablanca when that so occurred. Poirot's fingers drummed briefly on the table now. A key. The Baron fled not from guilt, but from fear. Fear that his own complicated story would make him a convenient scapegoat for crimes he did not commit. Captain's relief was almost palpable. Then surely we must look elsewhere for our killer. Perhaps someone from Carmichael's past who has not yet been identified. Précy set his gaze, fixing intently on the French officer. Someone from his past, someone who knew him well, enough to gain access to his hotel room without suspicion, someone with authority and resources to conduct a thorough search of both his belongings and later Mademoiselle Moreau's lodgings, someone whose position gave him intimate knowledge of our investigation's progress. The silence that followed was profound. Captain Laird's face had drained of color. Thoughts. Military discipline kept his posture erect. I'm afraid I don't follow your reasoning, Mia Poirot. Do you not then permit me to illuminate the matter further? The Lion operation of October 1940. You were indeed the French intelligence contact, were you not? But your role was far more significant than you have admitted. You were not simply a survivor of German treachery, you were its architect. The clerk's hand moved involuntarily toward his jacket, then stopped as he noticed Inspector Dubois's watchful eyes. That's a serious accusation. I demand proof. Pooh reached into his waist coat and withdrew the torn photograph. This photograph, found among Carmichael's effects, shows 3 men at Lion Station in October 1940. Yourself, Carmichael, and a third figure whose face has been deliberately lapsed, but observed the back of the photograph. Before the disaster, Carmichael kept this as evidence. Did he not evidence that you were present at the final briefing, that you had access to all operational details? Photographs proved nothing, the clerk replied, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. VMO, then perhaps you can explain the telegram received after Carmichael's death package, delivered recipient inferred identity, expect development soonest. W.C. Not Winston Churchill, as my friend Hastings suggested, but Wilhelm Canaris, head of German military intelligence. The package was information about current resistance activities, was it not? And the recipient, who is confirmed identity, was you still playing your double game after all these years? Inspector Dubois had quietly moved to position himself between LLA and Thecap's entrance. The method was Hubro. How was the locket room accomplished? Are we the locked room that was not locked at all? Captain Laird used his official credentials to gain entry to Carmichael's room, a meeting to discuss intelligence matters. But once inside, when Carmichael produced his confession letter and threatened exposure, had no choice but to silence him. permanently Pooh stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the Medina Quarter beyond the room's French doors open onto a narrow balcony overlooking the hotel's courtyard. The building's colonial arcade provides ledges and drainage pipes. It's child's play for a man with military training after shooting Carmichael and searching frantically for the confession letter. The cleric departed through the window, using Theo Verdon's chair as a step to reach the balcony, and the gun left beside the body. I asked Carmichael's own weapon, taken from his personal effects during the search. Nice touch to suggest suicide, though. The angle of the wound made this theory untenable. Upon closer examination, Captain sat in rigid silence for several moments before speaking. You cannot provine of this, cannot I, the expensive gray cloth caught on the window latch from a Chizier uniform? Jacket, a small tear that you have no doubt had repaired by now the bergamot scent noted by Mademoiselle Marot comes from the particular cologne favored by French military officers of fewer rank. Okay. Most damning of all, your own nervous habits betray you. Notice how you continue to touch your left breast pocket where you once kept Carmichael's confession letter. As if compelled by suggestion, hand moved again toward his jacket. Time Inspector Dubois was ready. I think we shall find that confession letter still in your possession, Captain Dubois said quietly. You dared not destroy it immediately in case other copies existed, but you could not leave it in your quarters where a search might discover it. The game was up, and Simeto recognized it, his military bearing crumbled as he buried his face in Hishon's. You don't understand the pressure we were under in 1940. France was following the government in chaos. The Germans offered guarantees protection for French citizens who cooperated at the cost of how many lives Yvette asked, her voice trembling with controlled fury. My brother trusted you. They all trusted you. I never intended for anyone to die, Blair whispered. I thought I could control the information, feed them just enough to maintain my position, while protecting the truly important operations. But then the Germans demanded proof of my value demanded significant success, so you betrayed the entire Leon network world, said with quiet disgust 23 men and women who died because of fear, weakness, and greed. Inspector Dubois rose from his chair, his handcuffed stiletto in his hands. Captain Bernardler, you are under arrest for the murder of Edwin Carmichael and the attempted murder of Ike Morrow. As the handcuffs clicked shut, the cafe's normal evening sound seemed to resume conversations in multiple languages, the clatter of tea glasses, the distant call of street vendors. But our corner table remained warped in a profound silence, broken only by I.T. Morrow's quiet tears for a brother whose death had finally been avenged, and for the terrible price that justice had demanded of them. Epilogue. Desert winds. Sepalogue. Desert winds. The morning of March 20th dawned clear and bright over Casablanca's airfield, where our aircraft sat ready for departure, its engines finally repaired after 5 days of meticulous work. The desert winds that had blown steady like Morocco during our stay had subsided to a gentle breeze, and the mechanics assured us that flying conditions were ideal for our long-awaited journey to London. As I supervised the loading of our modest luggage into the aircraft's cargo compartment, I reflected on how profoundly those 5 days had changed my understanding of the war we were fighting. What had begun as an enforced holiday had become a sobering lesson in the moral complexities that arise when civilization itself hangs in the balance. Hastings Poirot served, adjusting his tie as he prepared to board the aircraft. Our little sojourn in Casablanca draws to its close, but memories, they will remain, Nespa. Indeed, they would. The previous today had been spent concluding the formalities surrounding Captain Laird's arrest and ensuring that justice would properly serve. Inspector Dubois had proven himself both thorough and discreet, understanding the delicate international implications of the case. The French authorities in Morocco faced the comfortable task of prosecuting one of their own for crimes that touched upon the very foundations of their resistance. The German occupation himself, once his initial confession had been extracted, had proved almost eager to unburden himself of secrets that had tormented him for nearly 2 years. The weight of 23 deaths, it seemed, had ground heavier with each passing month. His collaboration with German intelligence begun, as he claimed, from a desire to protect French civilians from the worst excesses of occupation. But like so many who choose to walk the path of compromise with evil, he had found himself drawn ever deeper into betrayal until murder became his only means of concealment. The confession letter, I said, watching the ground crew complete their final preparations. What did it actually contain? Poirot's expression grew thoughtfully detailed account of the Lyon operation, including the names of all participants, the exact nature of the intelligence that was betrayed. But more than that, Hastings, it contained Carmichael's suspicions about continued German infiltration of Allied intelligence networks. Our Captain Lair was not the only one playing a double game, merely the most careless. This revelation had particular sycophants for the intelligence services in London, who would now need to conduct their own investigation into the networks that Carmichael had suspected of. Compromise, the ripple effects of his death would extend far beyond the streets of Casablanca. As the pilot began his pre-flight checks, I caught sight of a familiar figure standing by the airfield's terminal building. Ite Morrow raised her hand in a gesture of farewell, her dark hair catching the morning light. Inspector Dubois had informed us that she would be returning to France within the week, having received word that her service were needed in the growing resistance movement. There she will find her peace. That one, Pew murmured, following my gaze. The death of her brother has been avenged, and she knows now that his sacrifice was not in vain. Sometimes, my Nami, that knowledge is sufficient to heal even the deepest wounds. I hoped he was right. Eats courage in the face of Christie had been remarkable, and her narrow escape from desperate attempt to Zulans had only strengthened her resolve to continue her brother's work. War had taken much from her, but it had not broken her spirit. The question of Baron von Seckendorf's whereabouts had been resolved the previous evening when Inspector Dubois received a telegram from the British consul in Gibraltar. Baron had arrived there safely and was cooperating fully with British intelligence. Regarding his knowledge of German intelligence operations in North Africa, his flight from Casablanca, it appeared, had been motivated not by guilt, but by a well-founded fear that his complex past would make him a target for both German agents and Allied suspicion. A wise man, Poirot commented when I mentioned this development in times offer, the innocent often suffer alongside the guilty. Better to flee and live to fight another day than to remain and risk becoming a convenient scapegoat. Azor aircraft taxied toward the runway. I found myself thinking about the broader implications of our case. The war had created a world where ordinary people faced impossible choices, where survival sometimes demanded moral compromises would have been unthinkable. In peacetime, Edwin Carmichael had lived with the consequences of one such compromise, and it had ultimately cost him his life too. You think he knew? I asked Poirot as we settled into our seats and prepared for takeoff. Carmichael, do? You think he suspected Lair specifically, or was hesitantly aware that someone from the operation had survived? Keel was silent for a long moment, his hands folded neatly in his lap as he contemplated the question. I believe he knew Manami. The photography kept the specific details in his confession letter. These suggest that Monwo had identified his betrayer, but lacked the proof necessary to expose him. His approach to Hercule Poirot was perhaps his final gambit, his last attempt to ensure that the truth would not die with him. The irony was not lost on either Ophis. In seeking to silence Carmichael, had instead ensured that his own crimes would be fully exposed, The very confession letter he had killed to suppress now formed the cornerstone of case against him as our aircraft lifted off from Casablanca's airfield and began its journey northward toward London. I watched the white buildings of the city grow smaller below us until they were swallowed by the vastness of the Moroccan landscape. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, golden sand, shifting constantly under the influence of the winds that had blown across these lands for countless centuries. From this height, I could see the Atlantic Ocean stretching toward the horizon, its blue waters offering a pathway to safety for those fortunate enough to possess the proper papers and sufficient funds. How many refugees had stood on those distant shores? I wondered, gazing northward toward the promise of freedom that seemed always just beyond their reach. Justice Poirot said, as if reading me thoughts, "She is not always perfect, Hastings, but she is persistent. Sometimes your wheels grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. The truth has a way of emerging, even when buried beneath years of deception and self-justification." He hoped he was right. The world we were returning to was one where such betrayals had become commonplace, where a simple distinction between right and wrong had been obscured by the fog offward perhaps. It was men like Poirot, with their unwavering commitment to truth and justice, who would help us find our way back to moral clarity when the fighting finally ended, as afternoon gave way to evening and our aircraft continued its steady progress toward London. I made my final notes about our adventure in Casablanca. The case had been solved, justice had been served, and the innocent had been protected from further harm. By the standards of our profession, it had been a complete success. Yet, I could not shake the feeling that I had witnessed something larger than a simple murder case, a glimpse into the moral complexity of an age where good people were forced to make terrible choices, and where the price of survival limits included the sacrifice of one's soul. The desert winds that had blown across Casablanca during our stay had carried with them not just sand and heat, but the accumulated sorrows of a continent at war. As I settled back in my seat for the long flight ahead, lulled by the steady drone of the aircraft's engines, I offered silent prayer for all those who had been touched by the tragedy we had just witnessed, the living, the dead, the guilty, and the innocent, and all those who continued to struggle against darkness that had engulfed our world below us. Though now invisible in the gathering dusk, the desert winds continued their eternal dance across distance of North Africa, carrying with them the secrets and sorrows of a world at war. Thanks for joining us for the Casablanca Confession. If you enjoyed this wartime mystery with Hercule Poirot and the dark secrets of intelligence operations and long-buried guilt, don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories. And till next time, signing off from Stories Cafe.